Welcome to this week's Beyond Bitcoin Hangout. These hangouts are brought to you by the Beyond Bitcoin crew. We encourage everyone to freely share these recordings and to help spread the knowledge and benefits of our DPost 2.0 blockchain technology that we all call BitShares. While listening to this recording, please feel free to visit our website, beyondbitcoin.org, and be sure to stay tuned in for some additional information at the end of the recording. As always, we would like to say thank you, and we appreciate your support. So please continue to vote for our delegate or worker contract so we may continue providing these valuable services to our community members. So once again, welcome, and please enjoy this week's Hangout.
Welcome to another Beyond Bitcoin Hangout. Today is Friday, January 15th, 2016. We are here at the Beyond Bitcoin studios with our host, Fuzzy, and we're here to talk with Bytemaster, who is working for Cryptonomex, a developer team developing for the BitShares blockchain. And today we are going to hear some updates from Bytemaster for about 15 minutes. And then we're going to open up the microphone for community questions. So anyone who has a question can go ahead and speak up, and got sort of an open format here. So with that said, Bytemaster, would you like to start your updates?
Sure. Thanks for having me again, everyone, and thanks for everyone who's showing up. It's been an exciting week as always. So as far as updates, we've continued to make progress on the stealth proposal. More of the user interface dialogues are in place. I haven't checked with James to see what his latest is this week, but I trust that's moving along steadily as well. So I'm pretty happy with that. It's been a very interesting time in the Bitcoin world. I thought one of the most interesting things was the recent blog post by Mike Hearn regarding Bitcoin and the problems that Bitcoin XT has faced. I had no idea prior to his article that there was blatant censorship of proposed change, that the nodes on the Bitcoin network were being attacked if they upgraded or even tried to give people the ability to vote, and that they even attacked Coinbase, a major on-ramp in the Bitcoin space. And it's also very interesting that with all the hash power, there it says that two people in China control over 51% of the hash power, and that the Great Firewall of China is a major part in limiting the block size. All of these things paint a picture for Bitcoin that is much worse than I had previously anticipated. I had assumed that there was a big debate, but at least people were being civil about voting on which way to go. But it appears lack of governance and the fact that vested interests in Bitcoin are willing to use violence in the form of denial of service attacks in order to secure their position is a real shame. It's an indication that blockchain technology as a whole needs to have a plan for governance. And I think that this is one of the brightest things for BitShares' future, is that we have a governance model built in. We've got a culture that agrees to a process of consensus, and we've got a technology that doesn't have economies of scale that forces all the voting power to reside behind the Great Firewall of China. So it's a huge win for BitShares, and it shows that we are on the right track, that proof of stake is needed, but more than just proof of stake, you also need governance and consensus on changes. If you don't have governance and consensus on how changes should be implemented, then eventually, when you're getting to critical sizes and critical junctures, the whole system could fall apart. So if BitShares was nothing else other than a currency plus a consensus system for updating changes, it would be superior to Bitcoin in the sense that it solves the problems the Bitcoin industry is facing today. I suspect that the other interesting thing is that Bitcoin is having to raise fees. We have this huge debate on what our fees should be, and because of the block size limit being hit, users have to pay higher and higher now, so that BitShares fees always guarantee users a consistent 2-second average confirmation time, whereas Bitcoin, you pay similar fees and you might be waiting a day. So
I have a question regarding the voting before we get too deeply into the fee structure topic. And that is, some time ago in your blog post, you had posted, I think it was about a year ago, you posted the benefits of having honest voting and taking polls and how important polling is to set the direction of things. And of course, that's very important with regard to measuring consensus. And my question to you is, given how important that is and how strongly you've voiced your opinions about that, why is it that we haven't seen more of that type of thing done in BitShares? There's been various initiatives along the way to come up with user assets to gauge voting, but we haven't seen a structured and more or less Cryptonomex implemented or Bytemaster implemented approach to that to gauge input. And I'm wondering why that is.
that's because Nathan Hort, one of the primary developers behind Graphene, has been working with Follow My Vote to build just such a solution. And he is actively working on that each day, as far as I'm aware. So that is something that is on the radar. The Follow My Vote people are very interested in that for their own business. So it's coming as fast as they can put it together. So I just want to say that the only reason I'm bringing up Bitcoin, is I'm not trying to bash Bitcoin. I'm trying to highlight the strengths of BitShares and to encourage everyone about the value that BitShares has, even at its most fundamental role as a currency, before you even get to all the other cool things BitShares can do, like our account permissions, our exchange, and so on. And when you have that perspective, there's no reason why BitShares can't be a currency as well. So that was my reason for bringing up Bitcoin, and it's well talked about in the news article, so I figured it was relevant.
That's exactly what came to my mind as I was reading that article as well, was, my gosh, these are all the things that we've been talking about for a long time as in terms of the problems of Bitcoin and the things that it's going to have to overcome. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging the things that are wrong with BitShares and the things that are wrong with Bitcoin and the strengths of both.
Let's talk about the future of BitShares and ongoing development, and then I'll take questions. I've been talking with Dan Notestein from Block Trades about how he can help us take over the maintenance and support of BitShares and the exchange functionality. As you know, Block Trade is one of the major gateways in and out of BitShares. They have developers there who helped build the core parts of Graphene. They know what's going on. So this is going to be the first part of me advocating to have them be a worker that's just on a support contract to build and promote features that benefit the exchange and gateway business for BitShares. These are great guys. They've been providing a valuable service to us. They're sort of the auxiliary CNX, but I like the idea of decentralizing it. Even though they've done work for Cryptonomex, they are not tightly coupled. They have their own office and business, and they do their own thing. They don't take direction from me unless I pay them to do so. I thought that would be good to have some decentralization in development, so it's not just Cryptonomex, and to have someone in charge of it that has a vested interest in the viability of BitShares from an exchange and market maker perspective. I'm still working out the details with him, but we'll probably be putting forth a worker proposal that I plan to vote on and support to get that long-term steady improvements from the people who know it the best. He'll help prioritize the maintenance and support and bug fix requests for BitShares as well. So that will allow me to focus on the more advanced features and concepts and how those can benefit BitShares. getting more people involved, more decentralization of development, I think is all good signs for BitShares.
How are they doing this as far as pay? Are they planning on doing worker proposals for this? And
Yes, we're going to create worker proposals that can, there's a lot of ongoing bug fix requests that need to have funds, and we need to have people doing that. So I think we need to recognize that there are support and maintenance costs associated just with keeping things stable, fixing up little holes that we discover as they come up, and putting the finishing touches, right? Everyone says, I have a hard time finishing things. Dan's very good at finishing things and doing that type of thing. So I think it's good to put people in charge that have the skills to do these things at the appropriate phases in development.
speaking of the worker proposals, could I ask you a real quick question? Cass posted a worker proposal. Are you familiar with that? And could you give anybody some input as to what all Cass has done for BitShares?
Cass has done all of our websites. He's done all the presentations for everything that we do. Anything that looks pretty is probably Cass.
Probably. That's a good way of saying it, actually. So Block Trades and Cass are going to be posting different worker proposals as well. And yes, SVK. We can't forget SVK. He has a worker proposal. It's voted in, correct? Thought it was.
Yeah, I think so.
Sounds good. And this is a good place to, if anybody has any proxies that they'd like to talk to bring up or anything, feel free to say, I know that Xerox has one, Fav has one. If anybody else has one that we would like to get out to people, please feel free to let us know. And with that said, Bytemaster, is there anything else with the kind of like the update that you would like to continue with?
I'm ready to take questions.
Well, we have a couple primary topics, I guess. The one was rediscussing the committee payment. Have you seen the thread that's talking about this?
I have not.
BitCrab started it. There's only 5 replies to the thread thus far, but they're talking about the potential of putting back paying the people who are like a salary of some sort.
The committee.
Yes. And if anybody has any opinions or would like to bring something up in terms of this, feel free to do so. I've told people what I think already, so this is something that I can talk about or not.
Well, there's 2 options here. One is to replace the committee with the set of witnesses, so that they're one and the same. That would probably be the easier change that simultaneously solves both. Anyone who's a witness is ultimately responsible for hard forks. They understand the ramifications of a lot of the parameters, such as block size and fees, and they're the ones that have to deal with the consequences of parameter changes. So that would be the simplest way to get them paid, but it does break down some of the division of labor. I think it's a matter of scale. If BitShares were the size of Bitcoin, then you wouldn't need to pay committee members to do the job. They'd have a vested interest because of all the businesses that they're running on the blockchain. When BitShares is small, there's the creation of more jobs and more specialization. I can't support as much specialization. So that's a temporary solution until it gets bigger. But yes, that's an idea.
What are your thoughts on if we did pay them and let's say somebody controlled, because somebody mentioned in this thread, and I don't know if this is true or not, so I don't want to act as though this is fact for anybody who's listening, but it was alleged, and it brought up a good point, regardless of whether it was true or not, that somebody had control of a large voting stake because they were an exchange and they could basically put in committee members and kick them out as they wanted. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Keep in mind, exchanges have a financial interest in the continuing viability of BitShares, because every time a BitShares token is traded on their exchange, they're making money. And the more value BitShares has, the more money the exchange makes. So in the debate on whether or not exchanges should be voting, I think they most certainly should be voting. And the more involved they are in voting, the more secure the network will be. And if we can't trust a large exchange to vote in the best interest of BitShares, then the stakeholders in BitShares shouldn't vote for the exchange by leaving money on deposit there.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Effectively, when you deposit money to an exchange, you're nominating them to be your proxy.
Yeah, essentially. Well, no, in fact. Now the question is, and I agree with that. The question is it going to work out that way? Because there seems to be a level of apathy, and it might not necessarily always be apathy. It might just be there's a level of difficulty for people where they're concerned about whether they can control their own funds. If there are a lot of services out there that would help in a decentralized way to hold these in an easy way.
Could be a lack of understanding on the part of people that put their money in the exchange. I mean, the vast majority of people that use exchanges probably don't really consider that, that what they're doing with regard to vote proxying and how much importance that they give to the exchange themselves for doing governance and other elements of helping out the coins that are contributing to the exchange.
Now, keep in mind, though, that some people just keep their money on the exchange, but for others, the exchange means they're halfway out the door or halfway in. Well, I guess if they have BitShares on the exchange, they're either just got in, or they're halfway out the door, or they're traders. Now, we need traders providing liquidity, so that's good. They can be smart about where they trade, but they're probably going to be more loyal to the liquidity that the exchange provides than to BitShares, because they don't care about the price, only about the change in the price. Whereas the other parties, there's not much you can do. They want to go in and out, and they're going to go where the price is best. So I don't think we should be too hard on the people that keep money on exchanges. I guess we don't know what percentage of the money held on exchange is people who are keeping it there rather than withdrawing it. And so it's hard to know for sure how big of a problem it is. But I prefer to not shame those people, but try to come up with innovative solutions for getting them to move the money onto the blockchain.
Well, some of those things are happening. It's going to take a while. Ken Code made a good point, though, or brought up kind of a dissenting opinion. He said, do Congress members get to vote for other Congress members? If a speaker gets to hand out funds, that breeds corruption, in my opinion. I see exchange voting as no different.
Well, there's a overall principle I've held with BitShares and the whole development of things. Namely, don't fight what you can't prevent. If we don't have a way of technologically preventing it, then we need to accept it as part of the system and part of how things work. We can cry all we want about it, but it's sort of like recognizing that politics is inevitable and we can't code it out of blockchains, despite what all the people who think, mining, it's algorithmically pure, there's no politics, yada, yada, yada. It just moved it someplace else. So rather than trying to fight politics and make it not happen, we embraced it and automated it. So,
Ken, do you want to speak up and talk about this at all too? Okay.
So I guess what I'm saying is, if having money on the exchanges, there's two things we can do. We can incentivize people to keep money on the blockchain rather than on the exchanges. But you effectively have to pay them to do so. They keep it on the exchange for a reason. One of those reasons is if all you're doing is speculating, you don't need the tokens in your actual wallet. The exchange minimizes a lot of your risks that you take when you take responsibility for your own wallet. You don't have to back it up, so on and so forth. So if you want to have people take money off the exchanges, you're going to have to pay them to do so. So if it really is that big of a deal to the security of the system, then we should talk about how much we're willing to pay for it to change it. As far as ways of paying people to take money off of the exchange, there's two ways I can think of. One is to pay people to lock up funds, and the other is to pay people to do proof of work on their own coin.
That's cool. What do you mean proof of work on their own coin in terms of like various versions of proof of work other than mining, or?
As in, you mine your balance, and when you mine your own balance grows. And I guess it has a side effect of securing the network. But with the right mining algorithm, you can't pull it, and the funds always go to one person. And the exchanges aren't going to go through all the extra effort of setting up something that's not their core business.
And what is meant by mining your balance?
Basically, the mining algorithm depends upon your private key, and the funds go to the person who controls the private key. So unless you give your private key to other people, you can't mine. You can't do mining tools. So those are the two ways that we can incentivize people. But both of them involve paying for that. And I don't think it makes sense to pay for something like that when it's better to have the exchanges as valid members in the community. They have every reason to support the network and no reason to attack the network.
I'm so for free market principles too, and this thing about exchanges not being able to vote. It's a toss-up really, because they have such a voting stake that how is an exchange any different in that sense than a whale that might own 20 or 30 or 40 million BitShares, which is just one guy. He's not an exchange, but he should have every right to vote just like the exchange does. So I don't know, belay what I said about the exchanges, because they should have every right to vote just like anybody else. And some people are rich and some people are poor, and that just equates to, more voting power or not. So,
Well, I think the thing to remember too is that whatever they do is going to be very public. And I think the reality is, the statement that anything they do that hurts the network is going to be against their own self-interest is really valid. Any of these exchanges that have a big enough balance of BitShares to actually do anything effective, and we got to remember too that anything they do is probably most likely going to be temporary, whether they vote in a worker proposal or, vote their own committee members or whatever. The reality is the witnesses are ultimately in charge of they're the gatekeepers, so to speak. You can't fork any new code in without witnesses. You can't, they're in charge of keeping things up and running. The committee can make suggestions, but so, when we look at the actual real situations and the actual consequences of anything that happens, they're not quite as dire, I think, as people have made them out to be.
It's almost as if we're trying to approach this from like in a code perspective. How do you stop schmoozing and backdoor deals? I don't think that that's ever even going to be physically possible, blockchain or not.
All I think you can do is make sure that the people who are governing are the ones who have the onus of transparency. I've always thought that we have it backwards in our ecosystem right now. Like for instance, in governance right now, our politicians are the ones who are supposed to be public servants, right? So shouldn't they be very well scrutinized, and their lives should be extremely public, and there should be very little room to do backdoor deals, and they shouldn't enjoy that type of evasion of privacy. So after 4 years, they'll get out of office. You know what I mean?
Well, right.
Maybe taken care of. Excuse me?
I said, well, right, Fuzzy, but once stealth comes out, you kind of just shot that idea in the foot, because now politicians can use stealth just like anybody else. So again, we haven't solved any kind of schmoozing or backdoor deals issues that could go on. Transparency is great on CryptoFresh, but with stealth, man, they can hide money just like anybody else now.
Well,
So.
I wonder.
The thing is, when you're hiding money, you can't vote. So we can have a choice of having exchanges with large public balances that do vote, or we can request exchanges keep all their balances private, and we don't know if they're solvent or not, but at least we know they're not voting.
Well, the reality is we're never going to be able to prevent corruption. I don't think corruption is, it's something that is a byproduct of human relationships and any sort of, power structure. And I think what we've done here, however, in many ways, and what we're attempting to do is to, mitigate the consequences of the corruption so that they don't end up, putting everyone in a bind in the ways that they do, in sort of the current system. And this is just one example of something that's sort of borderline, because we have these relationships that we're all perceiving and as, having a certain amount of power with this voting stake. But if we break it down and look at it at a low level and what it is that the actual consequences that could happen, and we weigh that against the social consequences, and I think that we've still struck a very good balance. I think that even looking at this situation, it feels like Depos is robust enough, is anti-fragile enough to handle something like this.
I think that really we're just recreating what has already been done. In the old system, you've got credit cards, which are very trackable, traceable, and then you got the people who use cash. Well, in our system, you have stealth or not. So it's still a capitalistic monetary system issue. So we're not really leaving that. We're just making it digital.
I don't want to derail the current thread of the discussion here, but Data Security Node brought up an issue regarding the committee members and what they were dealing with recently, and I want to hear that discussed as well, because this all has to do with the committee member and governance.
Okay.
Data, would you like to talk a little bit about it? And BM, of course, please feel free to speak up along the way. Oh, okay. It says here, until he gets the chance to talk, the committee needs an emergency protocol to handle bad proposals. We worked on that last week when one committee member got a committee they could control. And then he says here, an exchange balance they could control. So basically, they have control of, is this Unity that was alleged in another post? Yes. Well, it's on the blockchain, I'm assuming. Is there any way of showing that? Like the balances? And I remember Unity's been around with BitShares for a while, so they could quite possibly have a large amount.
So when I look at the committee right now, I see that there are only 3 inits in, and the remaining people on the committee are a very solid group of people who combined have over $1 million worth of BitShares, I believe, voting for them. Maybe I'm looking at that wrong. I need to look at the calculations on the price. But bottom line is, these if someone creates a bad proposal, one thing we should do is have a hard fork change, more of a soft fork, and limit the range of parameters the committee can set without a hard fork. That way, there's some things we just don't need to be so dynamic that they can take effect and harm the network in a very bad way. For example, I don't think there's any reason at this stage to increase block intervals to anything more than 10 seconds. And yet a committee could vote to do just that. And then we could put in other limits on some of the other parameters that just hard-coded protections for what's reasonable versus what's not. For example, the maintenance interval should never be more than 1 day or something like that, so that if they do something, it'll at least be contained.
So your proposal, BM, is to limit the range of variations of parameters so that it can't get out of control. That would be the solution that you're proposing.
Yes. Yeah. The point of the committee is to fine tune things. It's not to radically change things.
Now, what if there need to be radical changes that need to be implemented? I mean, is this something that would hold them back from adding new things?
If there need to be radical changes, then the witnesses should all have to upgrade.
Not only that, but any radical changes can be the vote or the representation in the committee can be more unanimous or more solid and appeal to Cryptonomex or anybody else that's going to be controlling the code to get a new change like that out. And there's time for it.
Yeah, the committee should mostly be focused on, adjusting the fees as the price changes. But right now, in theory, the committee could adjust all the fees so that they're so high, the network stops. People can't even vote because the cost of updating an account is infinity. So, yes, I think we should probably have a maximum transaction fee for anything and put in some limits in there so that we have the power, even if it's expensive, to recover from things versus it being impossible to recover from a rogue committee.
What is it currently at? Is it only a majority vote with the committee?
It's stake weighted, so the more votes the committee member has, the more power they have, and it's 51%. But I can see increasing the threshold of committee approval to be 2/3.
Something significant, yeah. Because Zeldol here actually mentioned something similar. He says, what about 100% vote approval requirement?
Yeah, that has risks if you can't get a hold of someone or their account is lost or I don't know, but then of course they just get voted out. So I'm not against 100% approval, but I think that's probably overkill.
Yeah, you can take it too far in both ways.
I think the maintenance interval thing, and I'm going to say this out loud. You might want to edit this out later, Fuzzy. Although somebody can probably figure this out if they look deep enough. But that seems like a pretty vulnerable attack vector at this stage. I mean, if we said theoretically, some rogue exchange could decide to vote in all their own committee members, especially somebody like BTC38 with 400 or 500 million BTS sitting in their wallet. They could pull a 1-2 punch and vote in their own committee members, increase the maintenance interval to infinity, and that would be the end of it. Now, granted, right, we can just, hard fork, make another chain and start over again. Would that be the solution to that, Bytemaster? Basically take the record where it stood and launch another chain?
Yes, if someone did something that dastardly, we create a new chain that hard forked out the compromised stake. And everyone would have some temporary downtime, but overall, everyone's position is safe. And that's the thing.
What are we talking about in terms of downtime for that, though?
Depends on what they did. If they set the fees to infinity, then the network's basically dead. You can't do anything. So that's basically, it froze everyone's accounts. So we introduce a new hard fork that changes the fees, forks out the stake that voted for that, and continues. So this is all just information. It's information that's widely available, and the solution will be somewhat obvious. It's the more smaller, subtle attacks that don't allow the nuclear option of forking out the attacker that are actually more dangerous than the ones that would shut down the network. Shutting down the network, even as a result of a bug, like we saw a week or two ago, is not fatal. It's no different than the banks going closing for 2 days and then opening on Monday, right? It's
something we've dealt with. Humanity has dealt with at times.
Interesting analogy, though.
So
yeah, definitely.
So it's the attacks that are more dangerous are if someone stole the exchange's BitShares. The last thing they'd want to do is crash the network. They don't want to crash the network until they sell the exchange's BitShares for Bitcoin. But then they don't own the BitShares anymore. The only person who might want to attack BitShares and like, try to shut down the network would be a competitor chain. Maybe these same people that DDoS Bitcoin XT, they might say, hey, let's shut down BitShares before everyone figures out how great it is. But even then, that would all be temporary, and then people would realize that if your money's in BitShares, you're part of a community which has each other's back. We know each other's standing, and we can collectively take actions to protect our property rights. And that's what the blockchain's for. It's a record of property rights. And if someone compromises the record, well, we know the last good record, and we know what the fair and just rules are. We'll adopt that and move forward. So, large stake being compromised, it's not good, just like it's not good for any coin to have a large stakeholder suddenly become compromised and be willing to dump. But I'm looking into solutions to make the blockchains more robust against that. But I think a lot of these things are
bring up other attack vectors.
I'm sorry.
I'm done.
I just didn't realize some of the attacks that you were talking about that were more dangerous that you can't hard fork out of. It wasn't something that ever really occurred to me, actually. I don't know if I'm in the only one in this boat, but thanks for bringing it up. Bytemaster, would you mind if I moved a little bit towards some of the forum topics? A couple of them, actually. Okay. Buzz asks, how much would it cost to implement a simple GUI for PM, making it easier and straightforward to use, hiding all the back-end mechanics such as the need to borrow, sell, etc.?
It probably wouldn't be too difficult. I don't know how much it would cost until I've actually sit down and design the exact interface that would be required. But in my estimation, it should be a fraction of the cost of Stealth.
Okay, number 2 he has, and there's a few questions regarding bond markets here, but it goes, bond market. Could we pay a couple days of your time to make a general analysis about, is it feasible, how hard it would be, and what are the biggest problems to work out, and some ideas to solve those problems? How many hours, how many man hours would it need, and how much would it cost? And this, of course, the cost that would be a rough guesstimate. I'm just gonna plug that in there.
Sure. The biggest challenge with doing bond markets on the blockchain is the automatic calling of positions for 2 reasons. One, just because each order individually can be filled at the current price doesn't mean all debt positions can be filled at the same time. So there's a challenge in managing that. And if you can't guarantee that all margin positions can be called efficiently, then that's a problem. The other problem we have, or a challenge, I won't say it's necessarily a problem, is that with all positions being public, it makes it much easier to analyze how much you have to sell in order to trigger a cascading margin call. And if you know there's going to be a cascading margin call, then you can position your orders just right so that people sell right into you and you get a huge discount. So those are the 2 challenges with it. If the original bond system I proposed avoided those 2 challenges by combining the bond with an option. Just kind of like when you borrow money for a mortgage, you can either pay off the mortgage or turn in the keys to your house, but that is not as elegant as people like with some things. And so the original bond market proposal that I presented operated on that manner because it meant that we didn't have to solve the margin call problem. So as far as paying for a couple of days to evaluate what it would take, we just would put it to our normal rates. If that's something the community really wants to see is in-depth proposal, I can look into it in greater detail. I know it's a rabbit hole. You start going down there and there's issues that just come up left and right. So it's not easy. I would welcome a discussion on the forum. I think that would probably be the more cost-effective way to start out. Is let's try to figure out what rules can be implemented so that we can guarantee all accounts can be, all debt positions can be covered at all times. And if we can figure out a way to do that with constant time operations, so anytime someone places an order, we have to check to see if they fill that order, does it violate the invariant that, after this order has been filled, all the positions still be coverable. If someone cancels an order, can we allow them to cancel an order, or do we have to do a margin call first? Because canceling that order would remove liquidity necessary to cover all positions. So you see that it makes every single order you place on the market more computationally expensive if we don't have an efficient constant time way of verifying that filling that order won't cause a default. So let's try to brainstorm those ideas on the forum. If we can solve that and get a concise algorithm in place, then implementing it shouldn't be very costly.
Do you guys feel like that answered the question for you? Ken Code says with escrow service and freelancer reviews.
So somebody get a hold of RHAG and Lance Casper and Toast, and let's get a quorum going here of some economically bright people to solve these problems.
Well, this was a good thing that you bring up, Crypto. I was actually thinking along those lines. Have we considered, because I recognize that there are people who are frustrated with the way the market works at times. Have we ever considered having kind of a committee for how the market works for various issues in the market? And I'm not just talking about fees and stuff like that, right? I'm talking about like how the actual some of the things that Bytemaster just brought up.
Someone asked about a question about a fee-backed asset for the GUI. Could you elaborate, FA? One thing that I think would be interesting is a change that would allow users to add an operation to existing transactions, so that if you're using someone's GUI, the developer of that GUI who ultimately builds the transaction can arrange for a payment to be directed to them as well. That would incentivize people to build new GUIs. And if you made that payment go to a fee-backed asset, then that would even allow people to speculate on the future success of GUIs that implement that. Of course, anyone can fork the GUI and remove the operation from it, but I don't think that's a practical problem.
There was one question, I'm going to go ahead and move on, by Akato. The first milestone of stealth implementation was scheduled to be finished around January 15th today. We know there are always delays. Could you tell us if you're close to achieving it?
Yes, we've made lots of progress on all fronts toward all milestones. I haven't looked at the exact status of it. I can say that we're tracked to have everything complete by the final deadline. So we're doing things in parallel, and there's very little, we've designed it so there's little dependency among things. So I would say that the work for doing the hard fork and the fee-backed asset is a little bit behind schedule because we had a couple other things come up with respect to Muse this week. So we bumped that a little bit, but we're still on schedule overall for that piece. The user interface part is ahead of schedule. And like I said earlier in this call, I haven't checked with James. I'll probably follow up with him later today to see where he is on the browser side JavaScript. But all three of those things are moving along in parallel, and at this point, I'm still very confident that they'll all be done ahead of schedule.
Awesome.
I have a quick question. I was just curious. Do operation IDs are those relatively permanent and stable, or are the transaction hashes needed to be used?
In principle, operation IDs are not part of the protocol. We have broken those IDs once in the past, but then we did a second patch to fix it so that the IDs stayed the same because some people were relying on it. So I guess the short answer is we try to make them consistent, but we will break them if necessary. They're not part of the protocol.
Cool, thanks.
Based on the past experiences, if you should feel the need to do that, obviously you should disclose that ahead of time so people can make plans accordingly.
Correct. When it happened in the past, it was an unintentional breakage. So, yeah, we try to make sure that the operation IDs are consistent and they should be deterministic. At the very least, what we can do in the future is have old and new ways of doing it. You don't need to keep the operation history to run a node. You could compile that out and you'd still validate just fine. So anything we do in the future should be able to simultaneously support old and new IDs. So I think that you're probably pretty safe relying on those IDs.
Yeah. What is the extensions parameter? Does that require, is that based on the code, or is that purely just metadata?
It's there to support the addition of additional fields without breaking backwards compatibility with the serialization.
Does it require any code changes to the core?
Yes. You have to run new code to know how to deserialize new extensions. But if once you have the new code will be backward compatible, supporting clients that generate things with and without the extension. Old code will not be able to read operations that have new extensions. So it allows compatibility with new stuff being backward compatible, and it facilitates easy migration, easy addition of those fields without really hacky workarounds in the serialization parser for the various types. So we put it in there to future-proof it. Generally speaking, it's only useful for us when we're building hard forks as a way of adding data to existing structures. Some of the things that we'll be doing for feedback assets and maybe other things will make use of the extension field.
BitAcer here says, and I'm not sure exactly where he's going, but maybe you'll understand. If we consider a BTS to be a casino chip, which represents all ones, could it be possible for a user to create UIAs to represent 20s, 50s, and so on, and name it as he wishes without diluting the system? So instead of just a $1 token, these are like 20s, 50s. I see you with the casino analogy. Does that make sense to you, Bytemaster?
I'm not sure I fully understood the question.
Yeah, I guess if you imagine like a single chip and then a chip that's worth 5 of those single chips, and then a chip that's worth 10 of those single chips. But I guess the answer would be the UIAs themselves could represent. Well, could I create a token called BTS 50 and back it by 50 BTS each on the exchange and make it worth 50 BitShares? I guess is what he's saying. I mean, I think that's how you would do it, right?
Yes, that's exactly how it works.
Does that answer your question, BitAcer? And are you having some evil plans?
Yeah, so this week we came up with an interesting approach to doing dividends payments through a mutual fund kind of concept. There might also
to actual tokens.
Yes, so people can buy shares in a revenue stream, and
crap, that's huge.
And not rely on the share buyback approach.
one thing that people were talking about was that the share buyback approach legally is less complex. Is this something that is
It'd be the
case
same.
in your experience, or
The new solution is also just as legally uncomplex.
nice? Can you describe it a little more?
It's almost trivial. Yeah, I can I should put together a blog post describing it. It's
Sounds good.
But yeah, I can thank Ben, Theoretical BTS, for coming up with the idea. It's a really, really powerful way to have a bunch of people get shares in a revenue stream and allow them to buy in and cash out at any time.
Yeah, that's awesome. So are there like a lot of plans along those lines after this is accomplished?
Well, fee-backed assets are a big part of BitShares and its future, so any innovations we can have on this side would be good. It's another financial tool that BitShares can have. So I think BitShares is going to continue evolving to have more and more financial tools and improve. And I think slow and steady wins the race. And that's what we're doing here with BitShares. And we've got, we'd all love to see the network gain wide adoption from banks and everything else, and have people just pouring money into it and get us all rich overnight. But more often than not, you get rich by being persistent. And I think that the BitShares community can be very persistent and slowly adding little features like this over time as we figure out how to work together to get our financial freedom.
Are we talking persistent or stubborn?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
Fine line between those two.
Well, Lord knows we've been doing this for how many years now? I don't really wanting to stop at this juncture. With that said, Bytemaster and the community, do you guys have any final things that you'd like to bring up? We're sitting at about an hour and 6 minutes.
I'm done for the day.
Sounds good. I'll bring one more in, man. Buzz wants me to ask the final question. Bond market and margin trading, lending and shorting the lended. As far as I know, one of the biggest problems basically is that since all transaction lending would be publicly viewable on the blockchain, an attacker could see exactly how much he needs to cause a margin call. And there's a question mark there about this. Could the stealth feature be used to hide sensitive data to solve that problem?
Not trivially. It requires a lot of very basic research and mathematics. And I'll be honest, that's not my strong suit.
But there's nothing keeping other people from putting together worker proposals if that's possible.
If someone has an algorithm that they think can work, from what I know, the things I can do with stealth are verify that a set of balances add up to 0, or verify that a particular number is within some range. Anything other than those two operations, if it involves multiplication, price, comparison, I can't do that with stealth, at least with the primitives that I know how to use. There are other people who have worked on other homomorphic solutions out there, but one thing that all these homomorphic solutions have in common is very poor performance. So I'm already worried about performance of a bond market, just trying to maintain all the invariants that all margin positions can be filled based on the current order book at all times. So I think we'd have a huge win just by figuring out how to make it all transparent. And then those who do trade margin would know that when they're on our blockchain, they had better be extra careful that they don't get attacked. So they'll probably be more conservative on the blockchain because their positions are public than they might be gambling that the market won't move in a particular direction, right? If there's profit to be made by attacking, you should assume someone will attack and do it. So therefore, the people who use leverage would assume that when the market gets into that range, they're going to be called. And so they'll be proactive about covering their position prior to an attack being easy.
Buzz, do you feel like you have anything else that you need to... Well, SXIS says that he's not sold on it. Could you explain SXIS? Why wouldn't it not work?
Yeah, his point is that compared to a private closed book, it's not as protected, and therefore users would still prefer to trade on Polynex versus an open book with margin. The only thing that we could do is to move it so that only the witnesses can see the blockchain, and everyone else has to go through an elected node to get status on the blockchain. But that's not desirable either. So it's a real challenge, and that's the reason it doesn't exist yet. And that's the reason why bond market did not have margin calls built in. Like we've learned in the past, people don't like new things they don't understand. They like to trade on familiar terms. And so we should either figure out a way to do it that they're comfortable with or not. The other thing we could do is to loosen the guarantees on the bond system and have private individuals hold the bond funds in escrow. It'd be kind of like a centralized block bond market, but perhaps a little bit more restricted in what the person who's holding the escrow funds has the ability to do. So if they only have the ability to trigger a margin call by revealing the position, then most people could have their bond positions locked up where only that one person can see it. And then they run a node that monitors it and publishes it. There's probably some hybrid approach where you can have some secrecy with some trust, but still have a lot of the benefits of decentralization in terms of the person running the margin call aspect checks would not be able to steal the money. They could fail to report a margin call, but they could not run away with the money.
Satisfaction is guaranteed, SXIS. And jokes aside, I think that it's about perfect time to close this up if it's okay with everybody here. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Bytemaster, and we'll see you guys here for the next Hangout.